Okay, this week we're at week 5, and we're going over some middle stages of therapy, family therapy. The things that we're going to talk about today are teaching, active listening, and role play. So, um, starting off with teaching, it's important that the therapist takes an active role in the session. You have to show that you have control, and I don't mean that in a negative way where you're not giving the family any options, but it helps because if you let the family take control or the couple take control of the session, you're not going to have control, and things are just going to be arguments back and forth, or um, problems really won't get solved, and that's not why your clients are there. So you have to be part of the therapy session. Um, if it's too much about a certain individual, clearly, like as we've discussed before, that's going to be problematic because people aren't going to feel as though you're listening to them and caring about their problem. Again, you have to have a balance of active listening, reflection, and also being willing to step in and tell someone that I need to stop interrupting or correcting something or finding teachable moments. Always offer teaching at a time when the client will be most receptive. So probably when someone's really defensive, you probably shouldn't say, well, if you should have done this and then it would be better. For trying to find the right time to implement things, use their language. I mean, I'm not necessarily a person who uses foul language, but sometimes like a client, that's how they speak. And it's not that I'm stooping down to their level and I'm saying you should do this, but sometimes I'll be a little raw with them because that's how they speak and that's how they understand. Um, Reflecting behavior. It's okay to say, I noticed when so and so was talking, when dad was talking, you rolled your eyes, or I noticed when your wife was speaking, you kind of turned your back from her. Being able to point out how they're acting, because oftentimes people aren't thinking about that or realizing that's what they're communicating. Um, Show explanations. So explain how something different could be better. Help them process through that. Well, maybe if you were looking at her when she was talking, she would know that you're actually listening to her, even though you say that you are, but she can't tell by your physical appearance. Being able to show them simple things like that that can make a difference. Um, you can model it. I will show people how to maybe sit and listen to somebody, or I will demonstrate. We're going to get into active listening next. I will demonstrate that with the client first before I just expect them to know how to do it. Have them give them homework and make it tangible. So say, how practical is it that you'll be able to do this week? I'll say things like that, so I know for sure that hopefully they will give it a try. Um, Ask about it the next session. It's not good to assign homework and then not ask about it the next week. So you want to show that you're following through, so hopefully they're following through. Um, Active listening. It's a process of listening as an engaged participant. So you're not just sitting there already thinking about your response. You are actually sitting there and really engaged in what the person's saying. It involves both verbal and nonverbal communication. So, like I spoke of before, it involves looking at the person, giving them eye contact, not making silly faces, not fighting unfairly. The person is quiet, which usually reflects listening. Um, it shows eye contact, again, sitting towards them, probably in the same room as them. You're able to again nod your head or maybe say uh-huh, but it's not about you in that moment. So it's really focusing on the other person. If a listener is distracted by own thoughts, feelings, they can write them down to revisit later. Oftentimes, especially with couples, and this would also be with families, because again, if you have 4 people here in the room, there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of feedback, and so not everyone's going to be super open to what somebody has to say. But if we're really trying to encourage active listening, it's okay for them to jot things down really quick so they don't lose their thought. Because some people have a really terrible memory. But I will say this, people don't feel listened to if someone's distracted, and oftentimes people are thinking of their response instead of really focusing in on what someone has to say. The person talking may need some training. Sometimes, like my husband, for example, I love him to death, but he takes forever to explain a story. And maybe it's because of what I do as a therapist. I'm used to like people kind of getting to the point and he takes a long time. So you might have to tell somebody, okay, maybe break things down a little quicker because it's harder for someone to repeat back to somebody else what they're saying when it takes them like 10 minutes to explain something. Or you could have the person like explain things in chunks and then make sure that everybody else understands. Making sure they say I statements like, um, I feel this way when the dishes aren't done. I get very irritated when the dishes aren't done. Instead of saying, when you don't do the dishes, you make me irritated because it's not taking responsibility for your feelings. Um, I honestly believe, from my professional opinion, that the only person that makes you feel the way you do is you. And so when you put that off on somebody else, it usually creates a lot of defensiveness. So being very careful to make sure that your clients really try to use I statements to take, again, things down a level and make sure that things don't start arguments. Again, the whole point of this is to gain understanding. I'm not saying they're all going to agree. That's not practical. That's not realistic. But the goal is that they can at least understand one another. And that's a beautiful thing. I think if people feel understood, even if they don't feel agreed with, at least they feel like, wow, well, at least you heard me out. I think that could be a huge steps between parents and children. Like you, at least you understand it. I'm not, you may not agree with me, mom, but at least you're like listening to me and you hear me. And sometimes people feel like everybody has to agree, and that's not the real situation. I'm sorry, I double clicked. Okay, so like I mentioned here, keep points short. So that's important. Like you can't have someone who is going to um, go on and on and on and on forever and give speeches. Active listening, I'll have people literally in the room face each other, look at each other, and say, okay, so I feel irritated when you don't do the dishes. I'll use that example. Okay, husband, what did she just say? She says she's irritated when the dishes aren't done. Wife, is that true? Is that how you feel? Yes, that's how I feel. Did he understand you? Yes. Okay. Do you have anything else to say to that? No. And then I'll say the husband. Okay, now what is your response to that? Well, I didn't realize that you felt irritated when I didn't do the dishes, so I'll try to work on that. And then I'll say, wife, what did he just say? He didn't realize that I got irritated when he didn't do the dishes. Like it sounds so silly and so repetitive and so ridiculous at times, and it's like, really, you really want me to repeat back word for word what she just said? But how often like do people sit there and look at you and act as if they're listening and they're really just thinking of their response? I want you to take a hard look at yourself and think, how many times when someone's talking to me am I thinking about what I really want to tell them and not really listening to what they're saying? And that's where communication starts to break down, and that's where arguments start to happen. It's because people aren't truly listening. So this skill is huge in helping families to be able to communicate better and more clearly and concisely. Again, it's very uncomfortable and a little ridiculous because it seems very repetitive, but it slows down the conversation. And oftentimes we speak so quickly and we jump on one topic and then we switch over to another topic, and people get confused very easily and don't really understand what's going on. So this skill is huge, and it would be a very good skill to teach very early in family therapy, because hopefully this could be something you would do while in counseling with the family. Going back to teaching, staying on topic is huge. You'll get a lot with families and even with couples. They don't want to stick to the issue. And there's something that I have used over the years. It's called the 15 fair fighting rules. Some of you have heard about it before, and you're like, what are the 15 fair fighting rules? Part of the whole process is that um, you want to fight fair, and you're like, how is fighting and fair in the same sentence? It is, and it can be that way. Some of the things that it suggests is not bringing up the past, no zapping, so no name calling, disgusting faces, how you are with your body language, sticking to the issue, so not switching all over the place, no cross complaining, so not one person raising a complaint and the other person's like, well, you do this. Doing those kinds of things don't help resolve conflict. If anything, it just heightens the intensity of a conflict. And in those moments when I go over this, I'll have like a couple or a family say, okay, what do you do on this list? And people will be like, oh my gosh, my mom, she gives speeches. She goes on and on and on and on forever. and I stop listening like after the first minute. Or my dad, he plays psychologist. He'll tell me, well, the reason you do this is because when you were this age, blah 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 blah, and that kind of thing is really annoying to people. So the 15 fair fighting rules is a huge teachable moment for me, whether it be with just couples or family, because it helps them to see the dysfunction in the way that they argue and disagree with one another. And because of that dysfunction, people aren't being listened to and understood. So I'll go over something like that, and then I will teach them active listening and give them some guidelines as far as like it's okay to take a time out from a conversation. It's okay to come back and talk about something later. I'll discuss that we don't have to necessarily come up with a solution right away, but a solution does need to be discussed at some point. And those kinds of things can be quite life changing for people because they finally realize, well, I can have a conversation even if it's difficult. And that can be very freeing and very healing. Or I do finally feel understood. And I've been waiting to feel understood. And that sounds, again, maybe very simple, but for families that have never known any other way of functioning, like going back to what we spoke about before with the Genogram, and you see a lot of patterns of dysfunction and maybe even violence or things of that nature, like being heard and understood wasn't important. And so now that you're teaching them these skills, it's like a light bulb goes on. You know, it's kind of like when I talked about in class a few weeks ago about, you know, A plus B equals C, you know, our thoughts turn to our behaviors and beliefs. Like when we sometimes teach those kinds of things to our clients, they're like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. And some of these techniques, such as active listening, and how to fight fair, although they may seem like duh, like this is so obvious, for someone who's never experienced fighting fair, or if experienced someone really wanting to listen to them, it's like, oh my word, this would make such a difference in my home. So, and it's very simple, it's very practical, and it's things people can do that can really change the dynamic of the family. So there's many other things you can do like that. Some of the techniques I'm sure we'll go over a little bit later, but I mentioned one time it was like the straw activity that I do with clients. And it's just a way to, again, to show how they communicate. There's a lot of different ways we can teach our clients without necessarily being rude or direct, and not to say that you would ever be rude or direct, but some people really can't handle confrontation. And that's something maybe to work on as you build that alliance with them. But there's ways to have teachable moments with them catching their own like air. So with the straw activity, I'm able to see how people respond in situations, and they themselves are like, whoa, I really did act that way. I can't believe I did that. Or wow, like um, it was really hard for me to be quiet and not have control of the situation. That was really difficult. And the kids could be like, yeah, mom, you have a really hard time not being in control, you know? And that's when the family can start working through things based on what they're seeing. And it takes kind of that that role away from you, in the sense of feeling like you're the person that's always telling them everything they're doing wrong. They're able to catch it themselves, which makes it quite powerful. So just some things to think about. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I hope this is helpful. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask or email me and let me know. Have a good week.